All right, welcome to part 2 of our ladybug, and we finished the background, and now we're going to start with the ladybug itself. Paint that, and then add the shadows, some highlights, take off her masking, etc. So let's proceed with that. Okay, my paper is dry. Before I start on the red though, I want to make sure that I erase some of these pencil marks that may show through, especially on the parts that are highlighted in white. So I'm just going to very gently go around some of these. If they're black, I'm not so worried about it. Yeah, so there may not be a huge amount, come to think of it. This part here kind of branches out. So, as far as the mixture is concerned, I think it's a bit of the Pyrrole Scarlet here. Probably Quin Rose in the part that's the brightest. And then getting down to kind of a mixture of Quin Rose and the green. So we're going to mix up those colors and be right back. Okay, so I've got my trusty mixing brush. This is my Quin Rose, and I'm going to have a generous amount of that. I might add a little bit of the Pyrrole Scarlet to it because I think it helps make it look brighter. So I'm just going to mix those two, around 50-50 together. Okay. And I want a fairly saturated mix, or, probably a value 4, something like that. So that's the two mixed together. This is Quin Rose on its own. Okay. And then I'm going to do Pyrrole Scarlet on its own. Okay. And then I'm going to mix a little bit of the green that we've been using to dull down that Pyrrole Scarlet. So I'm just going to take some of this yellow. Here's everything that I've got in there. And then I'm going to take some of my ultramarine blue. Okay, maybe a bit more yellow. Okay, so that's probably pretty close. A bit more ultramarine blue because I want it to be thick enough. Okay, so those are my mixtures. And what we can do is give it a spritz. That way it will kind of soften out into the background. Okay. And we're going to start with the Pyrrole, which we want to kind of have. Let me use this brush. I think the bigger the brush, the better in this case. But it's a nice pointy one. It's an Escoda Perla. And I don't want too much water on the brush. So I'm going to start with my Scarlet. And I'm just going to go where I see the Scarlet the most, which is along here. I don't really want to cross into the green because then it will create a double edge. Okay. All right. Okay. Now the only other thing I would say is that could be a little bit more yellow in that area. So I'm going to take a very dry brush and I'm just going to put a little bit of yellow on the edge. Okay. And then I'm going to go down here with that yellow first. Try not to get my hair in. And now I'm starting to see the mixture of the two. So I'm going to go in. So this is the Quin Rose and the Pyrrole Scarlet. And what I'm going to do around this area is I'm going to take a clean brush. I'm going to just dampen this area so that when the paint hits the water, it won't be as bright in that spot. Okay. All right, and then down here. I thought it would blur more there, it did not. So I'm just gonna put a little bit more water, try not to touch the red too much. Just enough so that it blurs it out a bit there. Okay, that might do the trick. Okay, and I don't think I have another one of those here other than this part here. So I can do the same. I can just take a little bit off, clean my brush, and take a bit off. Okay, so onward. So continuing on with that mix, I'm just making sure it's wet everywhere again, so I don't have any hard lines coming out of there. Okay, and then I have a spot that is lighter than the rest right here. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm rinsing my brush, wiping it off, and I'm just taking that spot and making sure it's a bit lighter than the rest. And it actually goes right into this one as well. Okay. That's probably good enough. And then continuing on, I'm going to add a little bit of this green mixture as I get towards the back. Okay, a bit more of the green mixture. And back to the Pyrrole Scarlet. My paper's a bit dry, so I'm going to give it a little spritz. Keep it moving. Okay. And then underneath here it's quite green, so I'll go in with that. Went a bit over there, but I think that part's black anyway, so we're probably okay. Went over there. You'll see what happens if you go over into the green. It makes kind of a double line, but I will show you how to get rid of that. And I have some orange right up here that isn't really working for me. And there. So I think that's got mask on it. So that is it for the red spots, other than there seems to be a bit of red here with a tiny bit of orange. So we'll just put that there. Maybe that's his pollen that he's collected or something. Okay, so that's that. The next thing is within this, there's kind of a ultramarine blue shade. You'll see it down here. You'll see it in these spots here. So while it's still damp, because I don't really want it to be too emphasized, I am going to put that ultramarine blue in. I think it needs to be a bit watery, but the challenge is we don't want to create a blossom. So I'm just trying to be careful. Okay, that might do the trick. Okay, and then there's another one of those here. You can run it up into the red if you want. We're going to be covering it anyway. And it should have a round shape. Okay, and then I got my finger over there, which wasn't good. Probably need to fix that. Don't know how that's going to work, but it's probably not going to blend in the best, but we'll see how we do. Trick here is that if the paint is wetter than the dry paint, you really have a rough edge. So sometimes I just take a very soft brush and just kind of smooth it out. Dry, soft brush. Important point there. Okay, and we're going to add a little bit of blue here. Okay. And there's one blue spot back here. I think oh, it's actually one here too. They're mainly black, but I'm adding the blue in there as well. Okay, so now we have a bit of blue along here. And we have a bit of blue down in here. So this is going to help make it glow. Okay, and possibly a little bit of blue along here. So I'm just going to, oops, and I see one more spot with a bit of blue right here. And then I'm going to take a clean brush and just smooth all of those out so they're not so abrupt. Okay. And that is probably it for that part. And it looks like I put my hand in it again. I've got red paint all over the side. Okay, so now we need our black. Now you could try mixing the black from the ultramarine, the pyrrole, excuse me, pyrrole, and yellow, but you're not going to get a very dark black, so we're just going to add some neutral tint into that. If it's too purple, then I need to add some green, which is basically yellow and blue. Okay, now it's too blue, so I need to add more yellow, so I'm going to cheat and add some burnt sienna, a bit more burnt sienna, and that will help me get a nice dark. It's a bit too brown, so I'm going to add a little bit of Quin Rose. Still kind of purpley, a bit more burnt sienna, a bit more ultramarine. You just keep going until you get a nice dark color. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of green, so sometimes that, because it looks a bit too brown, and I'm thinking I'll counter it with some green. Okay, you're not seeing any of this, are you? Okay, so this is the color I mixed so far, which is kind of a brownie color. And I just keep going back and forth until I get to a color that I think is close to the black that we need. Okay, so we're going to run with that. I'm going to start with this part here. So when you're doing a line like this, the best way to do it is to look at the end. So start off your brush and then look at the end. And you'll be able to do a nice curved line. Now mine's a little thick, but that's the way it turned out. I was looking at the end and I wasn't looking at how much pressure I was putting on my brush. Okay, now this goes under here, and there's some masking there that we put on. And on top of this leg, there's a little bit of a highlight. So I'm just going to leave a little gap there. Okay, and then double check my line, make sure it's good. Okay, and then this is where we're going to leave a little bit of the highlight. In there. And then this joins up here. Yeah, we're just going to leave some dots, I think, in there. Okay. And then this kind of curves around like this. And these legs are pretty dark all the way down. We've got some masking here. And this leg, okay. It's got quite a curve to it. And I'm going to leave a little highlight there. Okay. All right. Okay, like that. And we have a little tiny highlight here. Like so. And we have a few dots here and there. Kind of gray dots. They're not really standing out too much. So we might even put some ultramarine blue in there for them. No, I didn't leave these, it looks like jaws almost. I didn't leave that, so I'm just extending them out. And here, just make sure your black has got good coverage, that it's not, you know, transparent anywhere. Again, I'm going to leave a small gap for this antennae. And then there's something else on the side of this. Watch my hand. Okay. And then this goes like this, that. Something else there. And that's the start of the leg. So we can now go around here. Here. Okay, I'm going to pick up a bit more paint. I'm going to go right up to here. Oops, did it again. Put my hand in it. Maybe I go this way. Oop, that's all wet. Okay. Carry on. Yeah, there's tiny bits, like if you did a dry brush mark there, that might work, but I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do that. Yeah, not really working, but even if you leave the tiniest part of the blue, that's going to help. Okay. Fill in all these holes. Okay. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. That's okay. I think this is masked, but I'm just going to put that across so I can see where it is. Okay. Now, we could try a bit of dry brush on that part. So basically, basically we want to go like this. And that kind of would make that mark. And then we have some dry brush here. And this mark. And then there's a bit of dry brush over here. And now we just do the other half of these. Okay, I think that one it was quite big actually. Make sure the shape is a good shape. And then we'll come back with the ultramarine almost right away to help those blend together. This one is pretty much black. I don't really see too much of a hint of the ultramarine in that one. And then we have one here. And I put one there. Okay, so ultramarine, rinse our brush, dab it off, grab some ultramarine, and that's just going to help us transition this a bit. Okay. Don't like the shape of this one. A tiny bit of water in there just so it blends out. Okay, there we go. So the other thing is, this has been masked, but if you put some blue over top of it, it might bleed through, because I see a bit of blue in that. Same with this, and same with this one. So we'll just add a tiny bit of blue into those. Okay, now we're going to do the legs. So for that we need a brown. The easiest way to create a brown is blue and red. So we'll mix our blue and red together and we've got a nice brown right there. Now there is some yellow on the legs as well, so we could start with, let's say, gamboge. And where did the legs start? Right here. Put some gamboge on, and that will kind of give some highlights. Okay, just on the outsides. Okay, and same thing over here, although this one's pretty black. Okay, and then pick up our brown that we made. A little bit darker underneath them. Oh, actually, it's not that dark. Okay. Okay, brown. And then brown. Okay, it's looking like a ladybug. All right, so now everything has to dry. We'll remove the mask, do all the touch-ups that we need to do. Ready to go. And we're ready to go. Everything is dry now, and what we're going to do is we're going to remove all the masking with a rubber cement eraser. And then we're going to work on softening those edges, because typically the masking leaves some very hard edges. Okay, that's it. So I have a number of softening brushes that work well. So this one is probably the lightest. I might turn on the light here so we can see better. This is probably the lightest that we have. It's a stiff bristle, and this is from Royal Langnickel. Then I have a filbert from Simply Simmons. Then I have a Eradicator by Billy Showell, which is great for fine details. And then I have this really, really stiff brush, again, from Royal Langnickel. So typically what I do is I start off with the softest brush and work my way through them in just rubbing out and softening some of the edges. In order to do this most effectively, it's good to have some sort of cloth. I like using these cloths that I get from Amazon. It's amazing how clean they wash up. But I'm going to start with my softest brush and just work my way through. Where it's black, I don't really want, I want to push into the black. I don't want to go this way because that will cause some issues of the black moving in. And I'm just putting my reference photo here so that I can have a good look at it as I do this process. So I'm going to start, as I mentioned, with my softest one. Wipe it off on the paper towel so that I wet it and then I wipe it off so that it's fairly dry. And let's start over here. The other thing it does for you is sometimes the masking leaves little bits. So it kind of clears off a bit of that masking, and it's important to just keep going into the water, wiping it off. Because as soon as you take some of this, especially the black paint off, then you have that on your brush and it's going to kind of mess up the area that you're trying to do. So it's interesting here, it has a tiny bit of red reflection in there. I can see that. So that might be something that we can add later on. Do I have my hair in here? No, we're good. Oh, so see there, I did not clean off my brush. So I actually made a bit of a mess there. So this brush is a little big. I might move to my next one down. And that way I can just take, so I'm always going from the white into the black. And then this part here, if you look at the reference photo, it actually goes quite a bit into the black there. So we're going to do that and soften that edge. Keep wiping. And I'm pushing out into the black. So that did a fairly good job. I could go a little bit further just to get rid of this sharp edge there. But again, I think I'm going to go to the next brush. And this is my, well, actually it's one after that, the Billy Showell. And just see if I can get rid of that line that seems to be there. So it did a fairly good job there. And then of course over here, oh, and watch on these brushes, they tend to, when you put them in the water, sometimes they have a drop sitting on them. Okay, that's looking better. And I'm just going to try to soften this part here as well. Okay, so that kind of merges into that. And now we want to soften this blue part. Okay. And I'm going to push a little bit of this blue up here. So you can kind of see that in the picture as well. And this is a very soft transition here. So we did that one. Now let's just go back up to this spot. Do the same here. And it looks like this kind of merges again into the blue. So we're creating very soft edges, and we're getting rid of any of these hard lines that we see. Okay, so that's good. So far, so good. Time-consuming process, but worth the effort in the end. I see 2 bits kind of hanging off here, but like that. I'm not sure if I like the shape of that, but what we can do is put some blue into that. I'm just going to clean up a little bit of this. Okay, it's probably good. And I'm going to get rid of this little dot that seems to be there. Okay, so that part is done. And I just kind of go around where I think it needs to be softened a bit. This edge is kind of interesting. It probably needs more paint there, so we might just leave that one for now. Here I'm trying to get rid of the pencil line as well. And this will have a little bit of paint on it as well because it's not really pure white here. Okay. And down here, I use my other brush, my filbert. Am I getting my hair in there? Nope, good. Okay. All right, so that looks fairly good. These ones are not bright white, they're kind of faded out, so I'm just blurring them out. This one here is bright at the top, but it's not bright at the bottom. Again, I'm blurring it out. This one here probably needs to be blurred out as well. This whole edge here could be blurred out. Here I can kind of move that into there so it doesn't look so weird. And I didn't miss, it's kind of like there's a little line. It might be from his antennae, I don't know. But there's a little line kind of going across here. So I'm just trying to put that in. Yeah, it could be his antennae actually. I'm just going to put that in very lightly. Okay, so that's that part. Here, you'll see there's a little bit of red coming into that. So I'm just going to drag a tiny bit of red down in there. Okay. And then over here, we want to straighten out this line. So I'm purposely starting at the red rather than pushing out into the red. I'm actually starting at the red and trying to make that look like it's shining out. And here I can actually start at the black, just evening out all these edges, making them look a bit straighter. Over here, same thing. So you can do this for hours, really. I'm not sure if you want to watch me do it for hours. Okay, now this part here is quite a mess. So I'm going to start again. I might pull a little bit of red into there first. So I do see some red there. And then I'm going to kind of pull whatever was there into it as well. And then I'm going to take a more aggressive brush. And I'm going to go out into the pink. I can bring some of that red in. This here, I can straighten out the line. Yeah, the line is thick and then thin, so it actually might need a bit of a coat on there, but, and you'll notice it's very blurry at the back. Kind of fuzzes out. We could thin that line, but I think we need to have a brighter red on there before we do that. Okay, and then the other spots are just looking at how these various edges, you know, if they're overlapping in some areas, one of the things you can do is just blur them out. Make this green go into the red to go into the green, because these really are blurred out. So I'm trying to get rid of some of them. Another way of doing it is just taking a damp brush and going along like this. Okay, and it kind of smooths out that whole area and blurs it out a bit. Okay, what else do we have? We have a few white spots here and there that could be subdued. That one might need a smaller brush for a minute. I think we might have to do another red coat. Okay, and then this part here. It's hard to say what's going on there. I think it's just a masking is what was a bit of a mess in that area. So, go back to this one. I'm trying to get this to be a bit smaller. It looks to me like it's too big. And this one's a bit too harsh. Okay. All right. So that's that. The legs, I put one coat on them, but they actually need a darker coat. So we're going to do the legs and we're going to do the shadow. So I don't know if you did the shadow or not in class. In some cases we did do it, but we're just going to apply that shadow. And in order to do that, I'm going to wet the whole area that I need to put the shadow in. And make sure I have a clean brush. This one doesn't look too clean, so I'm going to go clean it. I will be back. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to wet this area where we think the shadow should be. I've got a few white spots here because I put some mask around the legs. We are going to darken those legs though. So I'm just going in and looking at where I think the shadow is. And this is going to be a darker green that I mix. The only thing that's up there is just the leg. So in order to mix the darker green, I'm going to use my ultramarine, and I did not spray my paints. It's a good idea to always spray your paints before you start so that you wake them up and they blend better. Okay, so I'm just taking ultramarine blue. I'm going to mix a fairly thick mixture, so not tea, probably not coffee, and not quite cream, so a nice thick mixture that kind of bubbles up when you go through it. And I wet that area, so I'm just going to start. Again, I don't have a clean brush. I really should have checked these brushes beforehand. So I'm just going to start in the areas that I wet first. It looks like the shadow goes quite far out here. And it might need a little bit of green in there, so we can add a little bit of yellow. Let's get another brush to do that. I don't want to add too much yellow, but just a little bit. Okay. All right, yeah, we want some green to be in there. I'm just gonna go right into his body and the areas where the shadow is already there. And I do like the fact that there's this glint of light in behind there. So I'm going to leave that. So this is all his body. It's okay if there's some variation in the shadow. Maybe it's a bit darker, closer to him. Okay, and then as we get out to this area, the shadow could even be less intense. And there's just one line going from here. Okay, so that's probably about right. And then what I'm going to do is just soften that shadow with a brush, flat brush in this case, so that it doesn't have a hard edge. So that's his shadow. And actually I might even put that out there a bit so that there's not a hard edge there either. And this part here, I'm really drawing off my brush and I'm pushing this part back. Okay. I can add a bit more here because the advantage of this part being darker is it helps fix the shape here. But I want I'm just putting a bit of green in that part as well. Okay, put more green. And that should do it. We need to connect this with the end of his foot. Okay. All right, so that's that. The other place that needs shadow is some of these spots on his face. And when I look at this, I see some red, I see some blue. So there's a variety of colors in that area. So I'm just going to grab a bit of red. Ooh, maybe too much there. Okay, so a bit of red. A tiny bit of yellow even in that spot. Let me get these out of here. Okay, so I'm just mixing 3 primaries here, and I'm going to wet this down first. I'm going to put a little bit more blue in this area, and that's going to probably run in a bit, maybe a little bit of blue here, but I need my brush to wet that edge, so I don't really want a hard edge there. Okay, so that kind of came out like that, and this goes a little bit in here. Just taking that wet brush and moving it around a bit. And then I see some pink here. And you'll notice where you masked, the paint doesn't flow as nicely. The paper has been a bit messed up. So, oops, that's my clean brush. So the fibers, etc., have been kind of messed up in it. And that's why you get this situation where the paint doesn't really go on that great. And then in here, I'm going to put a little bit of, well, I guess it's the same color. It's almost like yellow and pink. A little bit there. Okay, and then this is kind of reflecting the background green. So I'm just going to take that yellow and blue, and I'm going to put that down there. Wet it. Okay, so I think that did what we needed it to do. The other thing I don't like is I don't like the way that this is shaped. If you look at the original diagram, this kind of came down more. The risk in wetting it now, once it's completely dry, is that I'm going to create an edge out here. So one way around that is to take a completely clean, dry brush Sometimes I find ones that are softer do a better job here, and just dry off that edge with this brush, and it softens the edge and stops you from getting that look. Okay, so I think that's mainly what I wanted to do there. We have a real mess in this area, but I think we can add some white at the end and maybe fix that up a bit. But before I do that, I would like to add another yellow, or sorry, not yellow, another layer of the red to this. And actually, I'm going to do one more thing. I see that this shape here is not the right shape. And there's a pencil mark in there. So I'm, again, going to use my scrubber brush and just get that like that. Okay. And I can soften this shape a bit because it's not that dark there. There is a lighter shape kind of here. And then I think there's a few lighter shapes in here. A few lighter shapes in the back. So we will work on the legs further, but actually, why don't we work on the legs now, because I did wet that area, and this way we can get the legs all done and move on from there. So the brown that I applied wasn't quite as dark as we would have liked. So I'm going to go in with a smaller brush, some burnt sienna, but I'm going to mix it with some ultramarine blue. And that way it's brown, but it's not, it's a kind of a bluey brown. And I'm just going to go in the areas where I think it needs some darker. And this kind of helps define the structure of his feet as well. So you'll notice here, it's quite dark in this area. And then it's almost like he's got a heel or something. Hard to say what that is. You know, this might go down a little bit further. Same thing here. This seems to go around like that. And in there. And then there's a joint there of some sort. There's another joint there. And something like that. And then back here, this is almost all dark. So I'm going to put that in. Blend it in with the black. And then there's some dark down there. There's too much white on the legs, so I'm trying to get rid of some of the white. And then it helps. I think they're furry. I actually think that this should look a little bit like fur. And the more joints and things you add, the better it will look. Okay, so it's starting to look like it has some definition. Interestingly enough, the shadow does not look like it's very dark. It went on quite light, I think. Okay, so what to do now? Yeah, we're going to have to put our red on before we do the black, and I just feel that the red needs to be brighter. It's not quite as bright as I would like, so we're going to go for that. It seems pretty dry, so I'm going to mix my red first. And I'm going to use Quin Rose. It looks like I had some green in my Quin Rose, which is interesting. And then I'm going to use my Pyrrole Scarlet, which is here. You can't even tell that it's Pyrrole Scarlet. Oh, now we're seeing a bit of that red. Okay. So those are my two reds, and they're fairly good mixtures. I might add a little bit more to this mixture here, a little stiffer. making sure it's got, you can see the tracks through it. Okay, so that's good. Now we're going to take our favorite, let's call it Perla brush, and I'm not wetting it first. I'm just going to go for it and try to get that nice red going down here. I might go into this black, and then as you get it here, it gets a little yellower. I don't know if you can see that, but it starts to kind of reflect what's happening in the background. So I'm just going to go up with that and merge these together. Okay, so that's that side. And then where I think it needs more Quin, I'm going to mix a little bit of the red I just used. And I'm going to put that in with the Quin. There's not a lot of red. It kind of fades out at the back here. So I'm going to get my Quin. I'm not going to go right to the back at this point. I'm just going to leave a gap there for a second. More Quin. It's okay if you go over your blue at this point. It's just going to make it more intense. Okay, and I do see a bit of this red again. And this edge we're going to have to blur out, so I'm just going to do that in 1 second. This edge we're going to have to blur out as well. Okay, and then as I get down here, my thing is in the way. And I keep going around. I'm moving fairly quickly so that I can get all of this in without it drying on me. Okay, so I think that's good. And then what I'm going to do is just take a damp brush and kind of move this red a little bit out into the background there. Okay, maybe a tiny bit more. Okay, now I have to soften all my edges. So I've got 2 brushes here. I'm going to use this one. And I'm pushing out. I left this spot at the bottom here because I want to put some more white there. So that's what that's all about. And here, just pushing into it. I've got a second brush in my hand in case I need it. And I'm wiping off my brush every time I do this so that I'm not making it wetter than what is already there. Okay, so I think that worked okay. And then we're going to go back and add some blue to this area. So the areas that have blue on them, I'm just going to add a tiny bit more blue. And I might even go a bit into the cobalt rather than the ultramarine. Enough water on my brush. Okay, so I'm just adding a little bit more blue to these areas. This area here. There's a little bit blue here and there, right? So now he looks a lot more intense. And well, I got the blue out. I'm going to add a little bit more here. So that looks good. And then the other thing that I promised to do was just finish off with a very fine line here so that that white shows through. Okay, I think that's good. Okay, and then finally we're gonna fix up this area with some bleed proof white. So I we'll have to find that. Okay, so I'm going to make sure I have a nice clean brush. And then I'm going to mix the bleed proof white off of my palette. I don't want to actually get it in. I'm going to have to make sure my brush is somewhat dry. And all I wanted to do was do this part a little bit whiter. I wanted to do this part a bit whiter. There. And then it seems that this part here is white as well. Oops. It still has the black there, but this part here goes right down into here. Okay. Make sure that's a good line. And then rinse the brush again. And I'm not going to touch that because we're going to put some black there. But I am going to touch this part just to blur it out a bit. And I am going to touch this part just to blur it out. I think that this actually was supposed to be closer. But I think that looks okay. Okay, so that's that. And then when that's dry, you can add the black. I'm just going to take the black, since I mixed it up, and put a little bit more black in some of these areas on his face. And fix some of these lines, because I didn't like the way that looked. This here. I guess go down more in a... And then of course we've got his antennae. And we'll add a tiny bit of white on the end of that. Just making sure our lines are in good shape. I probably shouldn't have done that, but hey, that's okay. This actually goes the other way, but too late for that. Okay, so I think we got that. These look a little bit too much like eyes, so I'm going to put that like that. And then what we want to do with this, put our black down to there. And then there's some black. Whoops. I guess that's okay. That's the way we did it. It goes down like this. And that. Maybe a little bit over there. And then I see a little bit of blue in there, so I'm going to put a little bit of blue. Cobalt blue. We'll see how that goes. A tiny bit of blue. Like that. And actually that does go fairly far over, doesn't it? Yeah, I think this part goes down, almost touching that. Yeah. Okay. And then here, okay, we're just going to soften this blue a bit, but I might need to add a bit more blue. That. Yeah. Doesn't really matter how accurate that part is. It's just trying to make it look like it's gradual and soft. Something like that. Okay. Is he done? Well, almost. We never did this green part here. So we can do that now. I'm just going to mix cobalt with yellow. And the trick with this one is to make sure that you have a clean brush. And what you want to do is, this is almost like a leaf that's kind of open. So I'm wetting down the paper around it. And I'm going to put the darker green here. Something like that. Just let it blend away. And then back to my clean brush. And that just merge. And then the green that's up there has a bit of yellow in it. It's kind of a messy yellow, that yellow. We need it brighter. Yeah. More handsome, I think. Make it look. Okay, and then this, same thing. We're just going to soften that whole shebang. Okay, soften it into that, soften it into that. Goes like that. Okay. Who knows what that is, but okay. There we go. That's better. I was trying to darken the green, but I think it's better if we just let it do its stuff. Okay, and then we have to get it darker underneath. I'm going to mix a little bit of that black that I had with the green that we've been mixing. Same thing, I'm going to wet around it. Wet down there. I want that to be soft there. Wet here. Okay, apply this dark shadow right through here. Going right through his legs with that shadow. And then this part is a line that goes kind of like that. And it goes into there. Yeah, I'm going to have that a bit closer. And then extend that more water and just extend it out behind him. More water. And it's not going on nice and soft. One way of correcting that is to just use a bigger brush and get it on like that. The more water, the more likely it's going to make a nice blend. Okay, I think that'll do the trick. It kind of says shadow to me. I don't know, does it say shadow to you? This part here is annoying. It's like it doesn't want to take the paint. I know there's not a shadow under here, but we're going to put one there. mimicking the shape of the ladybug. Okay, I think we're done. As we spent a lot of time on this, but you know, it is one of those things where it's more detailed work. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you for our next adventure. Thanks for joining.